to change gears here. Okay, I just want to. We have to finish up Sveika, and I want to go back for a minute to Sveika She'eino Metapech, and with that we're going to lead into how does Sveika work altogether as something which is matir. Okay? We saw the Tosfot Yeshanim in Ketubot said that you don't say a Sveika if it's Eino Metapech. And the example was a case where Safek Baki, Safek Eino Baki, Safek Ba'ones, Safek Biratzon. Okay? Where the way we analyze that case is that a regular Sveika, say, Safek Ba'ones, Safek Biratzon, Safek Tachtav, Safek Eino Tachtav, there are 4 possibilities. 3 out of the 4 are mutter, and 1 out of the 4 is asur. Correct? Right. The only case in the case of Ketubot which is asur is if it's tachtav biratzon. Right. Any other permutation she's muteret. Okay. So 3 out of 4 mutter, as opposed to the case of the Tosfot Yeshanim where it's really 2 out of 3. Right. Because it's either petach patuach, that's 1 possibility, and I'm sorry, it's either not patuach, that's 1 possibility, and if it's patuach, it's either ba'ones, it's either tachtav or eino tachtav, right? So those are really 3 possibilities, and 2 out of the 3 she's muteret. If it never happened, she's muteret, and even if it happened, but if it was eino tachtav, so she's also muteret. So there's 2 out of 3, and the third case, which Toso talks about, is Shem Ones Chadhu, where it seems you artificially manufacture questions in order to, almost as an illusion, you produce more possibilities. Okay? Where you say, Savi Ba'ones, Savi B'ratzon, and even B'ziratzon, maybe she was a Ktana, and Ones, and Ratzon, by Ktana is considered Ones. So the answer, why isn't that a Sveika? Because Shem Ones Chadhu, because your question really boils down to, was it Ones or Ratzon? Okay? So we had 3 possibilities. Okay? So we have 3 out of 4, everybody agrees is okay, as long as it's not Safek Echad B'guf or Safek Echad. I'm summarizing. So as long as it's not Safek Echad B'guf or Safek Echad B'tarovet, according to the Ri Balat Tosafot. Right? But if you don't have the Ri Balat Tosafot, so then if you have 3 out of 4, you're okay always. If you have 1 out of 2, then obviously it's not a Sveika, it's 1 Safek. That's Shem Ones Chadhu. And then you have this middle case of 2 out of 3. And that is a machloket, where the Tosfot Yeshanim holds that that's not a good Sveika. Tosfot themselves, when they're bothered by the Sveika, obviously hold that it is a good Sveika. And the Shach also says that it's a good Sveika. And the reason is because it's compelling to start with one side. It's compelling to start with the question, well, bichlal, do we have a problem here? And then, even if we think we may have a problem, it's not clear. So that's a good Sveika. Because that's really the 2 out of 3 case. So in the 2 out of 3 case, we have a machloket. Okay? So there, I said last week, I didn't explain anything. I don't want to fool you. Right? I mamish did not explain anything. All I did was analyze the cases. But analysis and explanations are 2 different things. Okay? So now I want to try to explain, we'll come back to, I'm going to withdraw from this question, but at the end, I want to come back to this to try to understand what that machloket is based on. Because l'chora, if you need 3 out of 4, so it's different between 3 out of 4, 2 out of 3. What difference does it make? Okay. Okay. So but we have to step back for a minute and talk about how does Sveika operate. How does it work? Bichlal. Well, if you say Sveika doraita l'chumra and Sveika dorban l'kula, so how does it work that a Sveika is mutar? Right? So one way of looking at it is the Ra'ah in the Bedek HaBayit. It's in the sources from 2 weeks ago. The Ra'ah in the Bedek HaBayit on Bayit Revi'i Shar Sheni. In the old edition, it's on Chaf Dal Amud Bet. Okay? You with me? So he says, the Tama de Rabbeinu, see that? Everybody have it? It's the beginning of the ra'ah. What's it? I printed it out so I can see what you guys have. You guys have it. Bedek habayit bait al shar sheini. Yeah, in the second page, the first source on the page is a shach, and the second page is Bedek habayit al Torat habayit bait al shar bet, which is chaf daled amud bet. Okay, so I'm starting not from the very beginning. I'm starting from when he gives his understanding. The Talmud Rabbeinu, he's doing of the Bala Tosfot. Why Safek Echad B'Guf and Safek Echad B'Tarovet is no good. Yes? Yeah, you got it? Mish, you have it? No? Okay, but Katav Rabbeinu Yitzchak HaZaken Hayadua Bala Tosafot. Okay? Okay? Okay, Dulo Amrina Tzveik Tzveik Ashari Ela B'Shtei Tzveikot HaBaot Mikoach Shtei Tarovot Kigon Zo She'amarnu Shenaflat HaBat Avodah Zarah L'Ribo Miribo L'Ribo Aval ba'alma she'eno ba mikoach shtei taravot lo. Upirish hachacham, the Rashba explains this. The Talmud Rabbeinu mishum de betrei sfeki de tarovet ika b'chol chada v'chada trei sfeki. Sheb'chol chada ika l'meimer lo zohi shenafla l'ribo rishon. Because when in the ribo sheni, each one you can say maybe this isn't the original one that fell into the first ribo, and even if it is, maybe this isn't. Right? So you have two sfeikot. In the first tarovet you have one safek, and the second tarovet you have two sfeikot. Okay? Ve'eino nachon. She'ein zeh ta'amo shel Rabbeinu. That's not the rationale of the Ribala Tosafot. Ela de Tama, this is what I want to bring out here. The Tama de Rabbeinu, Zal, de lo amrinan sfeik ashari b'deoraita, Ela hecha de besafek rishon shari midoraita. Ela midrabanan aser. Kigon ha de ta'arovet. Hilka chavale safek sheni safek drabanan. He does something very ingenious. It's the law of conservation of principles, right? There's no new principle of sfeik. He says the only time you say that a sfeik is no good, or the only time you say that sfeik is good, let's take the way he says it, if the first suffix is asa midrabanan, and then the second suffix, you have a suffix whether something is asa midrabanan, so that's a sfeik, right? And basically he reduces sfeik to sfeik d'rabanan l'kula. But if the first suffix is a sfeik d'oraita, so sfeik d'oraita l'chumra, he's holding like the Rashba, is midoraita. So now you have a suffix whether you have nisa d'oraita, so that's sfeik d'oraita. You're still stuck. Okay? So a sfeik has to be that the first suffix is only asa d'rabanan. So that's why you can talk about it in terms of a tarovet of tabaot of avodah zarah, because midoraisa everything is batel, and it's only midurabanan that it's not batel. So the first suffix, in other words, whatever comes out of that first tarovet is aser midurabanan, right? And then that iser durabanan falls into a second tarovet. So everything in that second tarovet is a sfeik durabanan, and sfeik durabanan l'kula. But if we were talking about an iser d'oraita, like suffix nolad, if you hold nolad is an Issa Torah. So then if a suffix nolad falls into a tarovet, so there's an Issa Doraita someplace in this tarovet. Right, so what's the assumption? First let's understand. The assumption is something that we spelled out before. The assumption is that Tzveka Doraita L'chumra, first of all, is the Doraita, but that of course is true because the Rambam is the only one that holds Tzveka D'Rabbanan L'chumra is Midrabbanan. What?
It would be Vatayas.
Exactly. That Tzveka D'Oraita L'chumra is Asur B'Torat Vadai. The issue of it being a suffix, that's history. It's not halacha. Like, why is it Asur? Oh, because we don't know what happened. But the nature of the Isser is that it's definitely Asur. Okay? So because of that, so now we have a definite Isser because it's a suffix in a tarovet. So that's Asur. That's his explanation. So what that means is that Tzveka D'Oraita, that Tzveka L'kula is basically the same din as Sveika D'Rabbanan L'Kula. Okay? There's no new halacha here. It just looks like a new halacha. Okay? Sveika L'Kula is basically Sveika D'Rabbanan L'Kula. It's the same thing. Okay? Now this would work if you take the Rambam then, right? And you say, okay, now if I would hold that Sveika D'Oraisa L'Chumra is only Midrabanan, so then in the Rambam, that's how Sveik always works. Right? He just has it in an exceptional case of Shtei Tarovot. Then the first Isser is a D'Rabbanan, and the second Isser is the first Tarovot is D'Rabbanan, and the second Tarovot is Mutter. But that would be, according to the Rambam, every case of Sveika. Right? So if you take this and you apply it to the Rambam, that's the explanation of Sveika. That basically Sveika is Sveika D'Rabbanan L'Kula. And it's the same thing. Okay? We'll see explicitly that the Rishonim will argue on that. Okay? That we'll have cases where you say Sveika, but you won't say Sveika D'Rabbanan L'Kula. We'll see that. Okay? But not yet. Right? So that's one way of understanding it. The other way is what I asked you to see in the Shut HaRashba. Okay? The Shut HaRashba on the last page. It's a long tshuva. I just put here the question and one line from the tshuva. Okay? It's in Chelik Aleph Siman Taf Aleph. Okay? So the question was, Sha'alta Od, Sveika, it's the last page. Everybody have it? Sveika de Kaimelan de Mutar, Im nomar kein afil b'makom deitchazik isura olo. Right? There's a chazaka against it. Ve'im tomar mutar man aselo tashamru b'chol ma'arvin dafilu sveik d'Rabbanan heicha deitchazik isura azlinan l'chumra. So you see that there's the assumption here is like the ra'ah actually. You see that? That if you say sveika is mutter against the cheskas iser, so then Sveik D'Rabbanan L'Kula should also be good even though there's a cheskas iser. I'll give you an example, right? You have an iser D'Rabbanan, I don't know, chametz she'arvel of Pesach, okay? And it gets mixed up with another piece of chametz which wasn't arvel of Pesach. So that's ikba isura. So let's say it's equivalent to a itchazik isura, and then it falls into something else, right? So you have a sveika. No, it doesn't, right? So you have itchazik isura. If it was an issa doraisa, you would say it's aser, but it's issa d'Rabbanan, but it's itchazik isura. So you say sveika d'Rabbanan l'kula there or not? So the shach, actually, we'll see. The shach says that you don't. This is an important point. The shach in Klalei Sveika says you don't say Sveika D'Rabbanan L'Kula in a case of Itchazik Isura. I'll find that for you in a second. Hold on. Here, if you look in Ot Chaf in Klalei Sveika.
Is that on a sheet or
No, it's not on a sheet. These are the throwaways, right? All right. In Sivkat and in Siman Chaf in Klalei Sveika, he says, "Miu kol zeh b'safek d'Rabbanan she'ein lo cheskas iser, al b'safek sheyesh lo cheskat isur, amrin b'kol ma'arvin quote same Gemara dazlin l'chumra." Okay, that's Ot Chaf in Klalei Sveika, the first line. Okay. And he says that Rashba oser sveika b'cheskat isur, v'Rashba b'tshuva shamedami lahedi isur d'Rabbanan sheyesh lo cheskat isur l'sveika b'cheskat isur ayin sham. Okay, you see that? See, he actually quotes the Rashba, but it's just really the shoel in the Rashba, the person who asked the question. Okay. So the question is, do I say sveika? Sveika is mutar even if there's a cheskat isur. Okay? So that was the question that he was asked. And what did he answer? So he wants to say that it's mutar. Okay? As opposed to Sveika D'Rabbanan. And he says, Teidalach od, this is the tshuva, yeah? Daha sveika adif kirov, ve'efshar da'alim hetero yoter mirov. he does the mechanistic thing. He starts off with doing the mechanistic thing.
Rove trumps
Right.
Chazaka.
Rove, quote unquote, trumps Chazaka. Ruba v'Chazaka, the Gemara says in the end of Kiddushin, that Ruba v'Chazaka, Ruba Adif. Okay? So he says the Sveka is quote unquote at least as good as a Rove. Right? Adayin or Adif kirov, ve'efshar da'alim hetero yoter mi Rove. Okay? Now, what does he mean by this? So is it hyperbole? In other words, is he saying that it's at least as good as Rove, but he doesn't really mean to compare it to Rove, or said that, or he doesn't mean to say that it works with the same mechanism that Rove works? Right? Does he mean the analogy to be more rigorous? And then he's saying that Sveik, and this is how the Shev Shmaita understood him, that Sveik works mita'am Rove, different than what we said before. Right, different than the Ra'ah. Right? The Ra'ah said that Sveik is basically Sveika d'Rabbanan L'Kula. He's saying, if we take him literally, that Sveik works like a Rove. What does that mean? So let's be very concrete about it. 3 out of 4 is a Rove. But you're not looking, what's interesting here, you're not looking at statistical likelihood, even though the Sveikot have to be more or less shakul. Right? If you have one Safek where there's a Rove inside, so you basically don't have a Sveika. Okay? That's Tosfot in Ketubot talks about such cases. But it's still not a statistical Rove. When you say Safek Ona, Safek Ratzon, Safek Tachtav, Safek Eno Tachtav, you have to admit that most Biot are B'Ratzon and not Ba'ones. Right? But somehow the Gemara makes a Sveika, Safek Ones, Safek Ratzon. So there are 4 possibilities in that matrix that I drew for you last week. So there's some sort of halacha that you look, it's in a sense, it's similar to kavua, since you look at the chanuyot and you don't look at the pieces. Right? You could say, why don't you just add up all the pieces and say most of the pieces? No, we look at the chanuyot as units. So here you're looking at the categories of question as units. Tachtav, Eina Tachtav, Ones, Ratzon, 4 possibilities. 3 out of the 4 possibilities are mutar. That's like a Rove. Okay? Maybe the Rashba is saying that. Okay? I'm not 100% convinced that that's true. It's very formalistic. And it doesn't really explain Ruba v'Chazaka Ruba Adif. Right? I explained to you why Ruba v'Chazaka Ruba Adif. It's not that you have 2 instruments which are brought to bear in the case of a Safek, and one instrument is more convincing than the other, right? Because suppose you talk about Rove and Karov. We talked about that when we talked about Kavua. So Rove is sort of a Beirur. It tells you a statistic probability. Karov, there's also some sort of probability. The odds are what you have here came from the closer place. Or does it come from a more populous place? Right? But you could see that the 2 instruments that the Torah provides for dealing with a case of Safek are talk on the same level. They're talking to each other. So you have to decide which instrument is more convincing. Right? So it's as if you have 2 Eidim say this and 2 Eidim say that. They're all Eidim, right? They're all trying to tell me what happened. And I have to decide what's going on here because now I have a conflict of these 2 groups of people, right? So I could say I have a conflict between Rove and Karov, or between Rove and Amigo. You can think about all the types of things where you have instruments in different areas of halacha which are designed to estimate for me what happened in the absence of true knowledge. Right? Is that what Chazaka is? I park my car outside. I assume it's still there. Right? I'm allowed to assume that it's still there. It's a Chazaka, right? That things continue. You need energy to change things. So that's a Chazaka. When you don't know, you assume the status quo until you know otherwise. But is that a Beirur? Does that tell me? But we know things actually do change. Everything, right? Heraclitus. You can't step into the same river twice because the yesod is that the only thing that you know for sure is that things do change. So what is a chazaka? So chazaka is sort of an arbitrary instrument where you don't know what happened. You have no other way of knowing. So you say, okay, so what should I do? I have to do something. I can't just say I don't know. I have to decide. So okay, so decide with the status quo. It doesn't mean that I think nothing changed. I acknowledge it might have changed. Does the fact that the behema becheskat isuro medet, it was the behema had a cheskat evim and achai, okay, and you shechted the animal, and you're not sure about the shchita. The fact that the behema had an isur evim and achai, that tells you whether you dozed off during shchita or not. The chazaka on the behema kept you awake. What are you talking about? Right? The chazaka does not relate to the reality at all. But it's just an instrument that you need some sort of normative tool to tell you what to do. That's what a chazaka. So now then it makes sense why you say ruba chazaka, ruba adif, right? Because rov addresses the question. Chazaka says is when you have no way of addressing the question, do this. Okay, I'll do that when I have no other way of addressing the question. But a rov addresses the question. So it's not that they talk to each other and one is more powerful. The fact that there's a rov preempts the use of the chazaka. Okay? So when he says that a sveka should work like a rov, and just like ruba v'chazaka, ruba adif, so sveka v'chazaka, sveka adif, that's a little funny. So then you have to say, what is a sveka? The fact that you have most possibilities, 3 out of 4, operate in a certain, push you in a certain direction, that somehow relates to the question, as opposed to a chazaka, which doesn't relate to the question at all. It's not nearly as convincing as ruba v'chazaka, ruba adif. Okay? So I don't have a solution for that. Right? But basically he's relating to sveka as some sort of beirur. Right? That's the language. It somehow does, a beirur means it tells me, it addresses what happened, as opposed to a chazaka, which is not, or a regular chazaka de meikara, a chazaka of maintaining the status quo, does not tell me at all what happened. It's not a beirur, what achronim call a hanhaga, or a hanhaga, they probably said, right? It tells you how to behave, but it doesn't tell you what happened. Okay. So that's the second way of understanding sveka, is that it's some sort of beirur. In all likelihood, this is mutar, when you have a sveka. Okay? Okay, a third possibility arises from Rabbeinu Tam in the question of Davar she'eino Mathirin. Okay? Whether you say, and this is in the Ramah already, or it's obviously made it into the Ramah, this discussion. Let's just see it in the Ramah first, and we'll go back. Okay? Where is it here? Let's talk about Sif Tet, I think. 1 second. Davar she'eino Mathirin. Hold on. Yeah. 1 second. Suffolk Treifa. About in between. Hold on. Where is it talk about sveka? About it must be earlier.
The end of Chet, maybe?
I'm checking, 1 second. Here it is, yeah. Yes, right, it's the end of Chet. So he says, Yesh omrim, the davar sheyesh lo matirin, ein lahatir mikoch sveka, v'tov lahachmir, im lo letzorech, mechar sheyesh lo heter b'lav hachi. See that? It's the very end of Chet. Okay, so let's look into that. This question, the Yesh Omrim, comes out of the Gemara in Beitza about the case of Safek Nolad. And the case said, and the Gemara goes on to say that it's nitarev ba'acherot, and then the Gemara then says it's mutter, and the Gemara says, why is it mutter? It's davar sheish lo matirin. Okay? So the question, you with me? I'm just repeating the Gemara to you. The Gemara begins to talk about Safek Beitza Safek Nolda B'Yom Tov. It's not a Safek Beitza, it's definitely a Beitza. There's a Safek where it's Nolda B'Yom Tov. Okay? And then the Gemara goes on to say, Nitarev Ba'acherot, right? Muteret. And the Gemara asks, it's Davar Sheish Lo Matirin. So the Machloket Rishonim, when the Gemara says Nitarev Ba'acherot, whether it's talking about the case immediately preceding, which is a case of Safek, so then we're talking about when it's Nitarev Ba'acherot, it's a Sfeika. Okay? And on that, the Gemara says, it's a Davar Sheish Lo Matirin. So you see the Davar Sheish Matirin is usher even in a Sfeika. Okay? That's one way of reading the Gemara. The other way of reading the Gemara, it says when it says Nitarev Ba'acherot, we're not talking about a Safek Shenolda. We're going back to the case of Vadai. So it's a Vadai Shenitarev, so it should be Batel. And the Gemara says, 1 second, it's a Davar Sheish Lo Matirin. And then the Gemara never said that a Sfeika in Davar Sheish Matirin is usher. So that's a machloket between the Ri and Rabbeinu Tam. Where the Ri says it's usher, and Rabbeinu Tam says no. The Gemara is talking about a Vadai that fell into a Tarovet, not a Safek that fell into a Tarovet. Because if a Safek fell into the Tarovet, that would be Sfeika, and that would be Mutter, even though it's Davar Sheish Lo Matirin. And when the Gemara introduces Davar Sheish Lo Matirin as a problem, it's talking about a case which is one Safek and not two Sfeikot. You with me?
It's confusing because Davar Sheish Lo Matirin seems to imply that it's Mutar.
No, so let me explain. Okay, so let me go back. Let's explain what a Davar Sheish Lo Matirin is. A Davar Sheish Lo Matirin is, and we'll talk about this next week. A Davar Sheish Lo Matirin is something which is usher now, but it will be mutter later. That's the standard case of Davar Sheish Lo Matirin. There are more complicated cases, but this is the case when you say stam Davar Sheish Lo Matirin. You're talking about something which is usher now, but it will be mutter later. Okay, like muktzah. So, it's Shabbos, so it's usher now. It'll be mutter later. That's the case in the Gemara. Okay, chametz b'Pesach. Okay, it's usher now. It'll be mutter later. Chadash. It's usher before Pesach. It'll be mutter after Pesach. Those cases, that's called Davar Sheish Lo Matirin, and the Gemara says Davar Sheish Lo Matirin is not batel. It's midrabanan. Now, why that should be, that we'll see next week. But the common reason given, and we'll see there's a very uncommon reason, which we're going to spend a lot of time on, but the common reason given is the way the Ramah says it, the tov lachmir me'achar sheyesh lo heter b'lav hachi. When do we say bittul? You have something which is usher. A piece of nevela falls into your cholent. So we say it's batel. Because if you don't say it's batel, you're going to have to throw the cholent out. So it's already a b'di'eved case. So b'di'eved will rely on bittul. But if instead of saying bittul, I could say, you know what? You have to be Jewish. You have to eat it now. Right? So say a beitza shenolda b'yom tov fell into your cholent. Okay. So it's usher now. So you have to eat the cholent now and be somech on bittul. Wait, it'll be mutter after Yantif. It'll be mutter after Shabbos. So then I don't allow bittul, since there's an alternative which Chazal thought was preferable. Instead of being somech on bittul, just wait. Okay? That's the lashon of Rashi and Beit says, why do you have to eat it now when it's asur? Eat it later, it'll be mutter. It's like, it's mutter, but wait. Right? It's sort of a frum instinct. Okay? That's a very common way of understanding Davar Sheish Lo Matirin. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's look at it in the Rashba. Okay, the Rashba quotes this machloket. It's on Chaf Hei Amud Bet. U'midivrei Rabbeinu Yaakov Zal Nilmod. In the Rashba. It's in the part I sent you. I sent it to you 2 weeks ago. Okay, so he quotes the case of Beitza, and he says, "U'midivrei Rabbeinu Yaakov zal." It would be the Rashba, Bayit Revi Shar Sheni.
This one,
and it's towards the end. I gave you a.
Yeah.
towards the end of the quote.
What are the words you're saying?
What?
What are the words?
Midivrei Rabbeinu Yaakov zal nilmod. Yeah? Okay? It's towards the end. Because I give you pieces of the Rashba. It's the first Sfeik sheet. Yeah. Okay? I'll read it slowly. You can listen and then, okay? U'midivrei Rabbeinu Yaakov zal, Rabbeinu Tam, right? Nilmod. D'chol Sfeika afilu b'davar sheyesh lo matirin mutar la'altar. Right? As opposed to davar sheyesh lo matirin, when you have to wait, it's mutar now. D'ha'o kimna tamad d'brai, right? To the, he reads the Gemara in Beitz the way I said. V'tama, now listen to this. Now he's going to explain something. And this is the first time I'm explaining anything. Okay? V'tama, d'chol shehu b'sfeik sveika, heter gamur mashvinan le. Ve'ein tzarich lahamtin. What's the principle of davar sheyesh lo matirin eino batel? Because bittul, this goes to how bittul works. Bittul does not really wipe out the identity of the Isser entirely. Isser is still here. Right? You say Torah chasam mamonam shel Yisrael, whatever svarot you want to give. But in this case, we say you can eat it anyway. That's why, if there's an alternative, we prefer to wait. If you can do away with the Isser entirely, in other words, we say, the way Rashi says it, Ach tochlina be'Isser, tochlina be'heter. Until you eat it be'Isser, why? Eat it be'heter. We're talking about the Isser in the Tarovet, and we say, Ach tochlina be'Isser, tochlina be'heter. So we're saying that it is, in some sense, still Usser when it's in the Tarovet. Okay. So he says, but that is not the case in Sfeik Sveika. Sfeik Sveika is heter gomor mashvinan le. Chazal said that Sfeik Sveika is mutar legamre. It's not usher on some sense, but you can eat it. It's heter gomor. Okay? Ve'eino domeh, this goes against the assumption of the shoel in the Shur HaRashba. Right? The shoel in the Shur HaRashba said is, do you say Sfeik Sveika against the Tchazik Isura? And if you say that you go with Sfeik Sveika against the Tchazik Isura, so how is it that Sfeika D'Rabbanan, and if it's a Tchazik Isura, you go L'chumra? The assumption was that they're the same. That Sfeika D'Rabbanan L'kula and Sfeik Sveika should be the same. Right? That's what certainly the Ra'ah thinks. Right? The Ra'ah thinks that they're the same halacha mamash. But even if I don't say it's the same halacha mamash, but I still think that they both are mutter the same way, even if it's not the same mechanism. The Ra'ah says that Sfeik Sveika is Sfeik D'Rabbanan L'kula. I don't have to go that far in order to make the equation between Sfeik Sveika and Sfeik D'Rabbanan L'kula. I can say maybe they operate on different principles, but the end result should be the same. That Sfeik Sveika L'kula is the same result as Sfeik D'Rabbanan L'kula. Right? I can say that. So what Rabbeinu Tam is saying so is not true. He's saying that Sfeik Sveika heter gomer mashvinan le. Ve'ein tzarich lahamtin. Ve'eino domeh l'safek echad b'shel divreihem d'shari k'sfeik sveika b'shel Torah. It's not the same. Sfeika D'Rabbanan L'kula is not the same as Sfeik Sveika, even though they're both mutter. Va'afilu hasi asik Rav Ashi hatam behi dereish parakama debeitza the b'davar sheyesh lo matirin afilu b'safek D'Rabbanan asur the hatam shani the kaven the b'safek echad b'kinegdo b'shel Torah asur ela mishum the b'shel divrayim takel bo lahatir b'safek echad kol sheyesh lo matirin lo takel bo. You catch that? I'll explain it. He says, I'll tell you the end, and then I'll show you how he says it. Okay? It's easier to know if you already know what he says. Then he says that Sfeika D'Rabbanan L'kula is still a suffix. Sfeik Sveika is not a suffix. Let's put it this way: a suffix. This is going to sound funny. A suffix is a suffix. A suffix, whether you have a suffix, is obsessive neurosis. right? It's obsessive compulsive neurosis, right? That's not a suffix. You got a problem with a sveka? Don't bother your rabbi. Call your shrink. Because a suffix, whether you have a suffix, halachically is not a suffix. That's a sveka. But a sveka d'Rabbanan l'kula, sveka d'Rabbanan is one suffix. Is a sveka d'Rabbanan l'kula, is it a suffix? Yeah. And what's his proof? Because kinegdo, in an issa d'oraisa, you say sveka l'chumra. A suffix, it's going to sound funny again, a suffix is a suffix. But the way I treat the suffix is different if it's a sveka d'oraita or a sveka d'Rabbanan. But epistemologically, they're the same. You have a suffix whether this is a Beita Shenolda B'Yom Tov, or you have a suffix whether this is a piece of Nevela. You have a suffix whether this is a Gvinas Akum, or you have a suffix whether this is a piece of Treifa. A suffix, it's the same suffix. What's different is the severity of the case, but the lack of knowledge and how I should treat it should be the same in terms of the nature of the din of suffix. So since I see in suffix echad midoraita I go l'chumra, that means a suffix is a suffix. So sveka d'Rabbanan l'kula, kinegdo be'isser Torah, I would go l'chumra. I see that even in the isser d'Rabbanan, it's still a suffix. It's just since it's an isser d'Rabbanan, we say that a suffix, you can go l'kula. That's with sveka d'Rabbanan l'kula, but that's not sveka. I'll read it again. Do you understand what I said?
What you said outside, yes.
What? When I said it outside, you said. Okay, so now what I just said is what he says. Okay? Okay. Ve'eno domeh l'safek echad b'shel divreihem. Deshari kisfek sveka shel Torah. All right, this is against the Ra'ah already, because it's sveka shel Torah, and the Ra'ah says that sveka only works if you have d'Rabbanan. But I'm saying that parenthetically. Okay, Deshari kisfek sveka shel Torah. Va'afilu hachi. Even though the end result is that they're both mutter, sveka is mutter, and a sveka d'Rabbanan is mutter also, right? But nonetheless, they're mutter in different ways. Vafilu hachi asik Rav Ashi hatam by hidereish parakama debeitza de b'davar sheyesh lo matirin vafilu b'safek d'Rabbanan asur. A davar sheyesh lo matirin even in a safek d'Rabbanan is asur. The hatam shani, but a sveka is mutter. Sveka in davar sheyesh lo matirin is mutter, but a safek d'Rabbanan is l'chumra if it's a davar sheyesh lo matirin. The hatam shani, in the case of suffix echad, the kevan de b'suffix echad, since in a case of suffix echad, in parentheses, d'Rabbanan, b'kinegdo b'shel Torah, in an analogous case, a suffix b'shel Torah, asur, right? So since you have this idea that a suffix can be asur, so even when you're mekil in the case of suffix, and why you mekil, el d'mishum b'shel divrayim takel bo lahatir, but because it's Rabbanan, you'll be mekil. So this treats safek as being asur b'torat safek, right? Since it's a safek is a safek, so if it's an isur, this goes back. It's very similar to the rationale of that girsa in the Rambam, except this is a much more well-known chiluk that safek is a safek. Now, when do I decide you're allowed to take a chance or you're not allowed to take a chance? That depends on the severity of the Isser. So in the Rambam, it's a chiluk between Chivei Kares and Shari Surah. But the simple chiluk is between Isser D'Orais and Isser D'Rabbanan. In an Isser D'Orais, you have to go l'chumra, because you're not allowed to take a chance. In an Isser D'Rabbanan, he says, since it's D'Rabbanan, we let you be mekil. Because what's the worst that can be? The worst that can be is you'll be over in Isser D'Rabbanan. Okay, we can live with that. We can live with that danger. That's within our ability to manage the risk. Okay, so that means Sfek D'Rabbanan L'Kula is still a suffix. It's not Heter Gamur. It's just since it's D'Rabbanan allowed to be Mekil. But if it's a Davar Sheish Lo Matirin, so now you have even a better alternative. This is no danger at all. Normally in the case of Sfek D'Rabbanan L'Kula, I'm willing to take upon myself a certain risk that maybe it is an Issa D'Rabbanan. Okay? So therefore I say, but if it's a Davar Sheish Lo Matirin, I'll go for the direction where there's no risk at all. Tomorrow it'll be mutter, without any risk. But that's not the case in Sveka. A suffix, whether you have a suffix, is simply not a suffix. Okay? So that's the third way of understanding how Sveka works. I love this, Rabbeinu Tam. Okay? But it's very elegant. Because either you reduce Sveka to nothing. Right? That's the Ra'ah. There's no such thing as Sveka. Sveika is just a way of saying Sveika D'Rabbanan L'Kula. That's the Ra'ah. Then you have the Rashba, if you take him a certain way, right? If you take the Rashba the way the Shev Shmaita takes the Rashba, is that it's like a rove. It's some sort of beirur. It relates to the question in a way which attempts to actually answer it, like a rove. Okay? And then you get this whole question of Sveika against Chazaka. Okay, so you say Ruba Chazaka, Ruba Adif. And the third way of understanding it is that a Sveika is simply not a suffix. In the language of the Rashba, Heter Gomor Mashvinan Le. They said it's just mutter. Right? So then, of course, Sveika against Chazaka, Sveika against all these questions that you have, of course they're mutter. Because Chazaka and all these other things, they're only brought when you have a suffix. But if you don't have a suffix, you don't have a suffix. So a suffix, just this should be a mantra, a suffix, whether you have a suffix, is not a suffix. It's a case for your analyst. Okay? Now, let's now go back and based on this, try to understand the machloket between... Yeah, question?
But
Yeah.
when you say it's not a suffix, meaning there's no danger? Meaning if in your mind...
That halachically, right, I said that it's mutter. So I put that danger behind me. It means there's this idea of having a leidata safek. We see that very important when you talk about kavua, and it's important when you talk about bittul, that the shat leidata safek is koveya. So there's a halachic formality of leidata safek. There are places where it's not relevant. For example, pikuach nefesh. Sfeik and pikuach nefesh is also mutter. Now, if I said sfeik is not a leidata safek, so then it shouldn't be mutter to be mechal Shabbos if you have a sfeik. But it's mutter to be mechal Shabbos even if there's a sfeik or pikuach nefesh. Because there you don't need a leidata safek. There the chashash is enough. I'm introducing different types of terminology. Chashash is a non-halachic worry. Okay? But you're just concerned that something that in the mitzias, if the person dies, you're not going to tell him it was usher for him to die because it's not a suffix. Right? Right? He wasn't an isha halacha. He died because it was a sfeik. So too bad. He's still dead. So you can. So when you talk about pikuach nefesh, there it's safek and sfeika. It's all mutter in the case of pikuach nefesh. But here we're talking about halachic categories. So halachically, a safek, whether you have a safek, does not constitute a leidata safek. And that's why heter gomer mashvinan le is still sort of a formalistic mashvinan le. Who made it to heter gomer? Mashvinan. We said that it's heter gomer. It's not that there's no danger. That's a very good point. Right? We said it's almost artificial. If it was sakanta, we wouldn't say sfeik and sakanta is mutter. Only sfeik and isura is mutter. Okay? Because formally, but if it's poison, if poison fell into 2 tarovot, right? You wouldn't say it's a sfeik, I can eat it. Right? Okay.
That's an interesting analogy.
Right?
Yeah.
Suppose it wasn't, right? If it was duggan in basa, right? Okay. Anyway.
So you're saying this is formalistic?
It's somewhat formalistic, right? But it's formalistic with a sensible twist. In other words, in the formalism, you need some sort of uncertainty to make you relate to the question. But if you, after you finish with your uncertainty, you still have another uncertainty, so that, ad kama do I have to relate to it? Right? So I say a suffix, whether you have a suffix, is simply not a suffix. Not that in reality it's not a suffix. I can still have uncertainty, but al pidin it's not a suffix. And that's what he means by heter gomer mashvinan le. Okay? Any question?
So if there's no leidas suffix, then presumably these two have to come at the same time?
Okay. So that's
It
very...
couldn't be a two-part process.
Hold on. We'll talk about that also. Okay? But hold on with that question. It's a very good question. There may be different types of sfeikos. Okay? Hold on. But let's go back to the machloket between the Tosot Yishanim and the Shach. And really the Tosot, because Tosot had the same case. They didn't say that it's not a good sfeik because it's not mitapech. So they thought it was a good sfeik, and they have to come with other reasons why to disqualify it. But they don't say that it's eno mitapech. So we have the case is a 2 out of 3 case is a machloket. 3 out of 4 everybody agrees is okay. 1 out of 2 everybody agrees it's not okay. 2 out of 3 for some reason have a machloket. Okay, so let's analyze that. In light of what we just said, I think some of it should come out by itself. if I say sfeika is like a rove, let's say, analogous to a rove, what do you say? 2 out of 3. Is that good or not?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to be, 2 out of 3 is also a rove, right? All right. So if you say, anyway, so if you say that the case of Baki Eno Baki Tachtav Eno Tachtav, or is it Onus Ratzon? I don't remember which the second suffix is. Baki Eno Baki, and what's the second one? Onus Ratzon.
Yeah.
Okay, but it doesn't matter for our argument now. Okay, so if you say that case, which is 2 out of 3 is mutter, right? There are 2 out of 3 scenarios which are mutter. Either she's a betula, that's one scenario, or she's not a betula, right? I remember now it was onus or ratzon, or she's not a betula because it was onus, or she's not a betula because she was ratzon. Those are 3 possibilities, not 4. There's no 4th possibility, right? You can't say she is a betula ba'ones. That would just be a human tragedy and frustration. That would be anything else, right? But that's a different way of thinking about it, okay? I remember the first time I realized that when I learned the sugya. Anyway, so if I say that sfeika is predicated upon a rove, so in 2 out of 3,
That's the Rashba then?
that's one way of understanding the Rashba. I'm not convinced it's the Rashba, but the Shmaisa understood the Rashba that way. Okay, so if you say it's like a rove, those 2 out of 3 also somehow addresses. If you say, once you're willing to accept the fact that you count up possibilities or you count up scenarios, and if you have a rove of scenarios that it's something like a rove, so 2 out of 3 is also a rove of scenarios. Why should I think that 3 out of 4 is good and 2 out of 3 is no good? Okay, there's no apparent reason to distinguish. Okay, if, however, I hold like Rabbeinu Tam, and I say that sfeika is mutter because the suffix, whether you have a suffix, is not a suffix. So here, maybe that's not so. Maybe 2 out of 3 is not good enough, because I can start with the other end, right? It's not mitahpech. It's not mitahpech, right? So if I say suffix on a suffix ratzon, that's a suffix, and I'm stuck. Right there, I'm stuck, because when I said suffix on suffix ratzon, I already assumed that she was a bu'ula. So it's true, you can start the other way, and then you get to a sfeika. But you can start, but you can't be mahapechet. It could be that in order to have this situation where a suffix, whether you have a suffix, is not a suffix, it has to be hermetically sealed. It has to be that you can never get to a situation where you actually have a suffix. Because if you actually have a suffix, you can't say there's no suffix here. It's true, you can avoid it, but you can get to it too. So once you can get to it, I can't say that there's no leidat hasafek at all. So again, if I look at it as rove, it's pretty clear that it works the way a rove, however it works with a rove, it would work 2 out of 3 would work like 3 out of 4. But if I say, like Rabbeinu Tam, that it's heter gomer mashvinan lei, I demand much more, because I'm accomplishing much more with the sfeika. A rove could still be a suffix also.
But can we go back to that case again? I thought I was...
Which case?
Why do you think, why isn't this a good sfeika? Why don't we say heter gomer mashvinan lei?
Because in the case of Baki Eno Baki, if I start let's start in the regular case, the 3 out of 4 case, I can start it wherever it's impregnable. In other words, I start with ones ratzon, then I go to tachtav eno tachtav, or I can start with tachtav eno tachtav and go to ones ratzon. It doesn't matter where you begin. There's no way you get to an isolated suffix. There's no way you have a leidat suffix. You're always with 2 sfeikot. So when you're always with 2 sfeikot, you're always saying a suffix. Whether you have a suffix is not a suffix. But in the case where it's edu mitahpech, there's a possibility of encountering 1 suffix. So even though it's say, but maybe logically I should start from the other side. That's true, and maybe even if you hold like Rabbeinu Tam, it's enough. I concede that. Even if you hold like Rabbeinu Tam, maybe you could say, since it's more natural to start with Baki, Eino Baki as your first question, so that's also a suffix whether you have a suffix, and that's also not a suffix. But there's room to say, according to Rabbeinu Tam, that since what I accomplished through a Sveika is much more sweeping, because a Sveika is heter gomur mashvinan lei, I'm very demanding in what I require in order to create that situation. In order to say that there's no leidata safek in a case of uncertainty, I have to make sure that there's no way I can get to that safek. And if there's some way I can get to that safek, then that already constitutes a leidata safek. So I could say that the machloket about around 2 out of 3 revolves around the nature of Sveika. Okay?
So
Yeah.
isn't that also because timing is of the essence?
That was a machloket.
Bdvar she'eino מתהפך really does relate to the timing, because technically, onus and ratzon came before baki she'eino baki. In other words, this situationally, you had that first situation before.
Well, he's on.
Unless
Well,
it never happened.
we don't know. It might have never happened.
But
If it
the
never
suffix-
happened, then it couldn't have been before.
But the existence of the suffix, technically, from a chronological point of view, happened before. So you can't really switch it.
What happens when he stupidly says...
Stupidly or not stupidly.
No.
When he makes the claim, that's when the
Only
suffix.
at that point it starts.
Yeah, there's no. I mean, it relates. He says something happened in the past, but that's the question, whether it did happen or not. When you say suffix baki, suffix eino baki, so there's okay. I'm sorry. A little bit of Indian philosophy. Okay, there's this idea in Indian philosophy which is put forth by an 8th century philosopher named Shankara, which is called the Maya. It has its roots in earlier writings, where you look at the world as somewhat illusory. Exactly what that means is beyond the scope of this discussion, right? So he talks about different types of illusion. He talks about illusions that we all share, that we're all in this room together and talking. That's one type of illusion. And then there's something else which you could call a hallucination, right? Where that's like seeing the water in the desert. There's no water there, right? There's nothing there. So you can't talk about, now I'm going back, what's the analogy? If he's wrong, then there's nothing there. You can't say, when did it happen? Nothing happened, right? Like, where is it? It's just in his words. Now I'm talking already, I'm going back and forth between Indian thought. It's just in his mind, right? It's just in his misunderstanding, in his darkness, in his ignorance, in his, what they call avidya, right? In this lack of knowledge, right? Okay, so there's a whole muscle there I'm not going to get into now. It's really fascinating, but okay. So this is how Indian philosophy impacts on Sveika. In other words, it didn't happen before. We don't know. The question is, did it happen or not? If we find out that it didn't happen, so it never happened. Right? Let's put it this way. There's a good mashal here in the Me'ah Shiloach says that the model for redemption is Yosef and the Achim. So we talked about Yosef before. The revelation of Yosef appears to be an Ish Mitzri. He's like the evil ruler that wants to oppress them. But when he reveals himself, you see, it's not only a Yeshua Mikan Lahaba. You realize that it was always Yosef. So you have to redefine everything Lamafreya. He says that's the redemption. That it's a change. It's not something that happens out there. It's an epistemological shift. Where did the Ish Mitzri, Asher Diberi Tanu Kashot, where did he go? What happened to him? Right? This is how the Indians talk. Right? What happened to him? Where did that go? There was an Ish Mitzri here. The prime minister was going to throw us in jail forever. And where did he go? So Mr. Berry was never here, right? When you have the knowledge, then you realize that what were your impressions before were just a vapor. Right? That's called Maya. Okay? That's what the Indians call Maya. Where did that go? Okay? So where did it go? You find out that she's a Betula. So where did it go? Nothing happened. It just disappeared. It was his claim. So his claim was a lie. His claim was ignorance. Okay.
It's always the side that says the logic is compelling to start with the other side.
Yeah.
Does it make sense? Is really weighting that other side as if it's two. Meaning,
In a
the side
sense.
that she didn't do it, she didn't do it baraton and she didn't do it ba'ones and she didn't do it. It's so strong.
Yeah, of course, but you have to, because that's the ikba isura question. First, you have to decide, do bichlal have a problem here? Decide whether the case is shafit, right? Whether there's, in a sense, whether there's jurisdiction, whether there's a question bichlal. Should we be listening to this guy, or should we just throw him out? That's the first question. Should we throw him out, or should we listen to him? Oh, okay, you want to admit the case to court? Now we have a suffix. Okay, but maybe you should never listen to the guy. Who is this guy? Right? He's some neurotic husband. So throw him out of court. He's another person for the shrink. Right? Okay? That's what we think. Okay, anyway. All right. Okay. There's something very important in the shach. And this is it's the last shach on the source page. Right? Yardei Siman Kuf Yud Sifkata Nun Vav. Okay? So we basically said that there are two ways of looking at Sveika. Right? The third way, again, the Ra'ah is in a sense very not interesting because you can say that the Ra'ah is a reductionist approach. There's no such thing as Sveika. Okay? It's a Sveika whether you have a Sveika. There's no such thing as Sveika. The Sveika is just Sveika D'Rabbanan L'Kula. Okay? Let's leave that. Forget about that. Okay? Now, assuming that there's such a thing about Sveika, so how do you understand it? So one way of understanding it is like a rove, in which case there still may be a suffix, but it's a rove, you're allowed to rely on it. And the other way of understanding it is that there's no suffix at all. Heter gomer mashvin alei. Right? Those are the two possibilities. Yeah? Okay. The Shach says something very interesting. Regarding the Isser Chadash, there's the famous tshuva of the Rush. The Rush is matir Chadash in Chutz La'aretz, even though it's a beferish that it's a beferish pasuk in the Torah. It says b'chol moshvotechem, right? The Rush is matir Chadash in Chutz La'aretz based on a Sveika. You have wheat in front of you. You have Safek. The wheat is from before Pesach. Right now, you don't know when this wheat comes from. Something the wheat is like from now and it's before Pesach, or it's Yashan. It's right? Something is from before Pesach, something is from after Pesach. And even if it's from before Pesach, maybe it was mashrish before Pesach. No, and even if it's after Pesach, which 1 second. If it grew, no, this is how it goes. If the wheat grew after Pesach, then it's Chadash. Only the wheat that grew before Pesach, now you're after Pesach. If the wheat grew before Pesach, it's Yashan. If it grew after Pesach, it's Chadash. You have to wait till next Pesach. Right? Okay. So he says like this, there's a Sveika. Safek if the wheat is from before Pesach, in which case it's Mutter, or from after Pesach, in which case it's Aser. And even if this wheat is from after Pesach, maybe it took root before Pesach, in which case it should also be mutter. So that's a Sveika. It's very strange. It's the it's Shem Echad, right? Because you just want to know whether we did before Pesach, after Pesach, and whatever. He doesn't deal with that problem. They had to be Matir Chadash. They just had to be Matir Chadash. They weren't looking at it too closely. Okay, but the Rush said it. Okay, whatever. But he says as follows. The problem is that Chadash is a Davar sheyesh lo Matirin. It might not be good enough to have a Sveika to be Matir Chadash. Right? So he says as follows. He's trying to understand the Rush. Then he says, Inami. This is in Nun Vav, in the middle of Nun Vav. Kuf Yud Sifkata Nun Vav, in the Shach. Inami, v'hu ha'ikar. This is the main reason, he says, why Chadash should be mutter. K'mo shekatuv Rush b'tshuva klal bet sof din aleph, v'zel shono. U'ma shekatuv b'shem Rabbeinu, namely the Marami Rutenberg, the davar sheyesh lo matirin, afilu sveika aser. What are you going to do? If you hold like the Ri or the Marami Rutenberg, that Sveika is Aser and Davar Sheyesh lo Matirin. Even if you build a Sveika, it doesn't help you with Chadash. Hainu dafka b'ta'arovot. Da'af al gav d'ba'alma mutter, mishum Sveika b'davar sheyesh lo Matirin hichmiru chazal. Dulo batil al yedei tarovot afilu be'elef b'sfeik sveika. Demai nafkamina lahati bebitul b'lavachi yesh lo heter. So he says, if you have a sfeik sveika of tarovot, 2 tarovot, that's where we say that because in 2 tarovot you're basically saying that the isser is batel in the second tarovet. But we're telling you that we don't like bittul when you can eat it later and it'll be mutter legamre. Okay? So in a sfeik sveika of 2 tarovot, that's where davar sheyesh matirin is still aser. But aval sfeik sveika ki high, but a sfeik sveika like this, namely before Pesach, after Pesach, and even if it's after Pesach, maybe hishrish before Pesach, that's a sfeik sveika like Safek ona, Safek ratzon, Safek tachtav, Safek eno tachtav. It's a sfeik sveika not of tarovot, it's a sfeik sveika of begufo, right? Aval sfeik sveika ki hai, shal tvua ani omer, shehu yashan, ve'im tinsel omar shu chadash, shema hishrish kodem la'omer, ve'ein kan isu chadash klal, kahai gavna lo asrin on sfeik sveika, b'davar shleish matirin. Ad kan l'shono. He's saying that there are 2 types of sfeik sveika. Right? It's a good old paradox. If I say is sfeik sveika mitam rov, or if sfeik sveika not a leidas asafek, the answer is yes. Because there are some types of sfeik sveika which are a leidat asafek, and you're matir like a rov, and there are other types of sfeik sveikas which are bichlal not a leidat asafek. And what's the nafkamina? Davar sheyesh lo matirin. If the sfeik sveika was like a rov, so we already told you that in hochin in davar sheyesh lo matirin there's no bittul berov, and there's no relying on a rov when it's davar sheyesh lo matirin, because a rov still leaves after it some sort of uncertainty, some sort of suffix. So achi tochlanu be'isur tochlanu be'heter gamur. So wait, right now you're eating it and you're eating it with a heter, right? Why do you have to eat it with a heter? Just eat it when it's mutter legamre. So that's the type. Only in the case you only say that in a type of sfeik sveika of tarovot, which is built upon bittul berov. But if you have a sfeik sveika begufo, like ones ratzon tachtav eino tachtav, that's a suffix. Well, you have a suffix. It's not a suffix. That's heter gamur. Then we'll say what Rabbeinu Tam says. Right? Rabbeinu Tam says in that case, even in davar sheyesh lo matirin it's mutter, because it's not a suffix at all. So it's heter gamur. So it's mutter now. You don't have to wait till tomorrow to be mutter. It's mutter already. Where did the Isser go? Right? Where did the Ish Mitzri go? Where did the Isser go? It's gone. Right? Heter gamur mashvin alei. Right? So what you see from this shach is there are 2 types of sfeik sveika. We analyze. We can 2 different possibilities, and they can both be right in different circumstances. Okay? All right. We'll stop here.